Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be wrapping up our positional rankings for the 2024 NFL Draft, talking about the edge position. We're going to be talking about defensive ends, we'll talk about outside linebackers, we'll talk about some players here that could even kick inside a little bit. There's a lot of different players we're going to talk about, not the same guy over and over with a different name. It's going to be exciting. Glad to jump into it. We got some really good players at the top of this class. I will say that. We don't have the elite guys, but we've got good players. And it is really, at the end of the day, just what do you like? What do you value more? Because there are arguably, I think, three players that could really have the same grade in this class, depending on what you want out of them. So I'm excited to get into this. For disclosure, I will be recording a lot of videos today. I'll be doing them in succession. They're not all going to come out at the same time, of course, but everything pretty much for this weekend is going to get recorded today, which today for me is April 18th, 2024. I've got a super busy weekend coming up. Going to be out of town for a Royals game. Got my birthday on Saturday. I want to get some stuff done for school. It's going to get crazy. So there's a lot of recordings taking place early. But with that all said, let's go ahead and let's jump into our top 10 edge prospects and get these rankings finished with for the 2024 NFL Draft. My first guy, he's really not close to anyone on this list, honestly. I think there's 9 guys who are pretty clearly above the rest. The 10th guy for me is Austin Booker. Now, Booker has had a very interesting pre-draft evaluation process. I feel like this is a guy that probably should have returned to school this year. I think that would have been best for him. I think he would be a better prospect coming out next year, especially if he could put on more size. The first thing you notice about him, he's young. One of the guys I wasn't able to get a specific age on, but he's got pretty good overall size other than the weight. He's 6'4.5", 240 pounds, which that's very light. I want to make that clear. Our next guy we'll talk about, he's a speed rusher and he's nearly 10 pounds heavier. Now, Austin Booker, he does have smaller hands, which not the end of the world, right? But it is something that you'd prefer. They were bigger. He has a solid overall wingspan. You got stuff to work with there. And as far as his speed, he is one of the slower guys. And this is what was so crazy about his testing at the combine, was that it looked like he put on weight before the combine to get up to 240 pounds. And then he goes out there and he's one of the slowest outside linebackers running. Like, that was not what I expected. And so I'm not really that high on him. I haven't been high on him this whole process. I've understood that he's a high potential kind of guy to a lot of people. He's just not one of my favorites. And like I said at the start of this, I think there's 9 players that I'd be looking at drafting out of this class above him that are just much better grades. Like, we've got a C here on Austin Booker. My next guy is a B. I think he's a middle of the second round pick. So I've got a lot of problems with Booker, but we will get into the film evaluation talking about him on the field. Well, like I've said before, long arms, he's got a lengthy frame. He does play with some suddenness, which I like to see. He has some pass rush moves developed at a young age. He has a nice Euro step he uses. He's unpredictable at times in his rushes, but this is not something that he is consistently doing. He needs to play longer to be able to mix up what he's doing more often. So it's very much something that maybe gets tackles early in a game, but after a while, I think he kind of runs out of creativity. So it's sort of a positive, it's sort of a negative. It's an on and off sort of thing for him. Now, one of the obvious positives to him is that he does have room to grow. He's played 1 year with Kansas. Like I said, should have gone back for another year. Would have made a ton of sense for him. Still would be a young prospect coming out next year, but guys like to get paid, you know, and if you get drafted, which he will, it'd be very hard for me to imagine he doesn't. He's going to get paid like $1 million his first year. So it's enticing, of course, right? Even if you bust out of the league, like, you're still going to get a good amount of money. So Austin Booker, I think that's maybe some of the motivation there. Not that he's just driven only by money, but for any college player, like, if you feel like you're going to be good at the next level, like, take your shot. You got to get paid, and even the rookie contracts will do that for the average person. Now, the final thing with him Well, and this is talking about positives. We'll get to concerns as well, but talking about the last positive I have, he does miss a lot of tackles, but I feel like when he does tackle, he has really good form. And so that's something you can work with, but you've just got to get strength on this guy. Like, that's so much of the problem because he literally looks like a linebacker on the field. That's a problem. Like, this guy is 10 pounds heavier than Edgerrin Cooper, and that's after putting on weight. And Edgerrin Cooper is one of the smaller linebackers as far as his playing size. So that's not good. Obviously, being 21 and having played a full season, he lacks a lot of experience starting on the field, and he struggles when he's taking on contact. He is not going to win one-on-ones that well. He needs to win with speed, and then you go see when he bulks up to 240, he doesn't have much of that. So I don't like these things. Like, this is not a player I'm a fan of, personally. I don't see any world where I would take him in the draft. He would pretty much have to be a UDFA for me to give him a shot. I'm not trying to just, ruin the guy here, but those are just my opinions. Now, teams will probably feel a little differently. They'll probably get a shot 4th, 5th round at the end of the day. But for me, not a super highly rated prospect. But we'll go ahead. We're going to get into our next guy here. This is really where I think things can start to ramp up a little bit. So our next guy is Adisa Isaac. And to kind of just describe what I see him as in general, and we'll obviously go into detail, I think he's going to be a high-level rotational rusher. He can start on the field, but I think he's going to be really good in that kind of role. He's 22 and a half years old, 6'4.5", 247 pounds. He is bigger than Booker, but that's his actual playing size, which is good. I would have liked to see him maybe 5 pounds heavier, something like that, but he's a speed rusher. That's the way he plays. He's got average hand size. He's got long arms and a pretty good wingspan. Very similar to Austin Booker when we're talking about the arm length. As far as his speed, did not test well in the 40-yard dash either compared to some of these players, but a little closer to average than what Austin Booker was. He came in with a decent 10-yard split, was better than his 40-yard dash as far as just in comparison to some other players, and he had a pretty good RAS score. So as far as measurables and such, there's not a ton to know other than this guy is built like a speed rusher. A lot of things are generally average, but he does have long arms that he can work with, and so that part is good. But getting into his film, with Adisa Isaac, he's got a lot of athleticism on the field. He's very flexible. He's shifty. He has that short area burst. He has the build to be a very good speed rusher, and he's done it in college. He gets pressure consistently. It could be really hard for blockers to get their hands on him. So you love a lot of these things with him, and that's what makes him, I think, an immediate rotational pass rusher in the NFL. And he has upside past that. That is not his ceiling. He's not one of these players that, okay, I know what he's going to be. There's the floor and the ceiling are identical. I think he does have potential to be even better than what he is right now. And he's been tested against some of the better prospects in this class. He did it at the Senior Bowl. He played for Penn State. He's going up against good players. So you love to see that, but there are issues. He needs to improve his pursuit angles. And man, like, if he could do that, pairing together the fact that he's a speed rusher with that, that's going to help him a lot. That could be a positive in his game at some point. He plays with adequate power, but if he's engaged with blockers for long periods of time, that's not an ideal situation for him to be in. He's not built for that. And I feel like, while he does have some pass rush moves, he does have room to improve his overall plan. He lacks overall refinement. But at the end of the day, like, I think whatever team picks Isaac is going to be happy with the player they're getting as long as they do it at the right point in the draft. He should be a productive pro, not a dominant pro, but one that can be productive and be a nice part of a room at the next level. So that's what I'd like to see from him. If he's getting picked, like middle of the second round, like I said, I think that's where he goes, but it's probably not where I'm taking him. I'm probably taking him closer to that third round selection that we have at the end of the third round, but I don't think he'll be there, realistically. But overall, I think he's going to be a good pro at the next level. Getting to our next guy, and it's really weird, like thinking about where he was a couple months ago and where he is now, because this was considered a first-round pick. Braylon Trice. He's ranked just above Adisa Isaac for me. 63rd overall, 23 years old. He's 6'3.5", 245 pounds. I want to talk about that for a second, the 245 pounds. He was supposed to be a power rusher at Washington. That is the way that he was playing and what you could see on film from him. And then he comes out to the combine. All of a sudden, he goes from this really huge edge rusher to suddenly now this guy is 245 and he's undersized. I'm confused at how he got there. That doesn't sound healthy to me. So, what people thought he was, I don't know if he's still that player on the field, because what I saw on the field is very different from what he is right now as far as what his measurements say. It's clear he lost weight. He also came in with small hands. He came in under the 33-inch threshold for arm length. And his wingspan, compared to the last couple guys, is over 3 inches shorter. Like, these are some big differences. Some really bad things for his overall projection. The reason why I put him above Isaac and Booker is because he was a prospect who was considered potential first-round guy for a reason. He was productive in college. I think, in fact, towards the end of the year, and this is one of my positives, we'll actually just kind of transition into the film with this. Braylon Trice, you can make an argument that he was the most productive pass rusher in college football after week 9 this last year. He accumulated 7 sacks and 53 pressures all the way from week 9 to the semifinals. So that's a lot of production. I mean, we're talking about 53 pressures in that time. That'd rival any pass rusher in the NFL. Of course, this is the college football level, but Washington played some pretty good teams during that time as well. So there's things to really like about him. I feel like when I watch him on film, like, he does a great job uprooting blockers. He drives them back. He's constantly moving his way towards the ball. He knows where it's going. And he shows pretty good discipline in the run game. And you're going to do that naturally when you're a bigger guy when you're playing on the field. Now, like I said, I have no clue what he is now. That's the scary thing and why a lot of people will probably avoid him. But those are all things that I do like about him that, of course, now I have to kind of question a bit. As far as concerns, he's not that explosive. And you look at his testing, he was pretty average. I mean, he was average or below average. So that didn't change with losing a ton of weight. I don't think he's a great athlete. I think he's kind of stiff. He's high-hipped. He doesn't bend that well. And as a tackler, he doesn't always wrap up. So if he is all the things that he was last year on film, and this whole weight thing is just some weird fluky thing, which is very difficult for me to believe, then perhaps he can be at most a priority second-round pick. That's just not the world we live in, though. There are major questions with Trice's profile as a prospect, because what he was at the combine clearly is different than what he was on film. So now we don't know what he is as a prospect. So you could argue maybe you even take Isaac over him. I don't think you can take Booker over him. I think that's too hard for me to sell. But Trice, it's a hard one, and you're taking a big risk if you draft him, but at the same time, I mean, there's some reward there. It could be worth a pick on day 2. I just don't think it should be an early one. Now, getting to our next guy, we're going to get into some more exciting players here. We got a personal favorite of mine coming up here soon that I became a fan of pretty early in the year. Marshawn Nealon, though, is the next one. Got a bit of a jump here. Goes up to 51st overall on my prospect rankings. He comes in as a relatively young player. He's going to turn 23 just before the season. He's 6'3", so a little shorter, but that's going to be the theme with a lot of these guys we're talking about. In general, these pass rushers are not that tall, which is a little weird to see compared to most years. He's 267 pounds, though. This is a dense football player. He does have small hands, but he's got fantastic arm length. He has a near 7-foot wingspan. And as far as his explosion, his 40-yard dash, like all the things we learned from that, a little bit below average. Which, those things, it's a bit concerning, but when you watch him on film, that's where Marshawn Kneeland goes from the random prospect from Western Michigan to being one of the top edge rushers in this class. Marshawn Kneeland kicked inside the guards a bit. That was a shocking thing I saw on film. You do not see a lot of that from your defensive ends. Now, maybe we'll see some of that from Josh Allen this year because Nielsen wants to employ that. That'll be fun to watch, but not something that happens a whole lot. He does have really good speed to power conversion, though. For not being that fast of a football player, based off the 40-yard dash, I felt like he did a great job being able to deliver power. He is a very instinctual run defender as well. Has a good way of getting off blocks, getting to the ball. Really like that about him. And for having small hands, he does a good job using them on the field with his contact with blockers and such things. He also ran track and field, so he has good speed on the football field. It's just a weird thing where at the 40-yard dash, he just didn't perform as well as you expected. And he also comes in, despite coming from a smaller school, with an arsenal of pass rush moves that he can use. Now, talking about detriments here, he is on the short end, like I mentioned, but this is very similar for a lot of these prospects we're going to talk about. It's not detrimental either. It's not the end of the world to be 6'3" and be a pass rusher. Because he's got the length. That's the thing, too. Like, he's got long arms. Like, he makes up for a lot of those things, and that can be a really good combination, too. Now, another thing, he doesn't have much bend or flexibility, so he's not going to be someone who's going to bend around the edge and beat you with speed. He's going to be someone who runs through you. He can use his speed to generate power, to push blockers off their feet, and to get around them. So I like that about him. But he's just not going to be someone that you're going to be worried about the edge too much with. So guys like, for example, we talked about Jordan Morgan, like, these are the players they're going to perform better against because they don't got to worry about the edge as much. So he can't threaten in that way as well as you would like, and that's going to limit his production ultimately at the end of the day. And the final thing, and this is just as far as how you deploy him, like, I didn't see any coverage ability from him when I was watching film, so this is someone you're going to want as a defensive end. I don't want him dropping into coverage and doing any of that. He needs to be on the front at all times. You can kick him inside if you want here and there, but he's not going to be someone you're putting in a 2-point stance, having fall back and cover a wide receiver or a tight end. Like, that's just not what Marshawn Kneeland is when you watch him. But overall, like, he's a strong power rusher with really good film. It's the first thing you notice from him. It was that way with pretty much all these small school prospects. We talked about Christian Boyd a little bit, just phenomenal film from them. It's just trying to figure out where do these guys fit when they've played against the lower level of competition. So that's how I feel about Marshawn Kneeland. Ultimately, I think he's going to be a good player, and you got to watch him against a good team in Iowa. You know, at least well, you know what? A really bad offense. Let's be fair. It's a good general team, right? But Iowa's offense was kind of ass last year. Let's be real. Next guy, Christian Braswell. Or I should call him Chris Braswell, because if I call him Christian Braswell, you'll get him mixed up with our draft pick last year. It would be funny to see him go to Jacksonville just for the sake of the confusion when they call out, hey, Chris, we want to talk to you. And then two Chris's come up. They say, no, Chris Braswell. And then both of them are still there. You know, what do you do? Someone's got to get their name changed. But Chris Braswell, 22 and a half years old, 6'3.5", 251 pounds. I think pretty good size overall. The only detriment you see as far as measurements is the hand size. It's not the end of the world at all. He's got good arm length, good overall wingspan. Nothing like incredible, but just good all around. You look at his speed as well. This is a pretty fast player. Out of everyone we've talked about so far, he is the fastest. And we will get into a couple guys who ran faster, and it is crazy how well they did with that. There's a lot of separation between some of these prospects in that 40-yard dash, in that 10-yard split. But Chris Braswell, overall, pretty dang good athlete, I would say. Not the best in the world, but a good one. Now, getting into his film and what I saw evaluating him, he was the guy I watched when I watched Dallas Turner originally, who we'll talk about later in this video, of course. Kind of stood out to me. Originally, I was like, man, this guy almost looks like Josh Allen, but honestly, that's just because he's wearing 41. Started watching him on film. He's a pretty good player, and he was productive for Alabama. He put up good numbers this year, and so I thought, well, I got to put him on this list. I've got to evaluate him because he's doing a really good job alongside another guy who's going to be one of the top prospects at the end of the day. And there were some great things I found on film. He has some good speed off the edge, better speed than what you see with most of these players. He's got good burst. He can make some big hits as well, and he demonstrates great power. Like, this is one of those guys that has a great balance between the speed and power aspects of the edge position. He's got long arms. His grip strength is really good. He gets after the ball, and he is an incredibly gifted athlete in a lot of ways. He has good special teams value. Like, that's something that people don't always notice with him. Like, he had a block kick this year at one point. Like, he will, even if you don't have him as your starter on the field, which I think he can start, ideally, he's a really great rotational piece for any team. Like, that's what you want, but he's a starter in the NFL. He's absolutely one of those guys. But he can play special teams if he's not. He can get on the field. He can make an impact in that regard. So teams that value that, such as Jacksonville, this guy's going to go up the list because of that. He also does a really good job in coverage. I liked what I saw on film. I think he could be a fit in a 3-4 scheme as an outside linebacker. I think he could do that. Now, concerns, I think the angles are questionable at times. His experience is a little limited. It has ramped up this last season, of course. He played a lot, but not someone who saw a ton of playing time before that. And then the final thing that I have written is the tackling must be more consistent. But if I'm going to basically, like, I'll just say overall, like, what limits him on my list, because if it's just three things like that, you'd think he was one of the top 3 guys, right? It's just ultimately this argument that, like, well, Chris Braswell's pretty good at everything. Is he great, right? We talked about this. Actually, we didn't talk about this, but I thought about it earlier in the college football season with, like, Cedric Van Pran, where he's not really a highly rated prospect anymore, but he was just kind of, in general, like, good at most things. Just never really took the next step, right? Now, that's the difference between him and Chris Braswell, is that Braswell obviously took a step this year. Like, he started, he did well on the field. That's a change from the past. But it's just a question of, like, what is the ceiling for Braswell? Is this just a generally good football player that, you know, maybe you're okay having him start, but you're always considering having an upgrade, and Braswell being ideally a backup? Like, I don't know where he falls at the end of the day, but I would love him. I would love to have him on my football team as, you know, a rotational guy who can still get a lot of snaps. But you imagine, like, our pass rush room, you got Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker, who are starting on the field. You have a guy who can rotate with them in Chris Braswell. I think that is a very good situation for him to be in. So I would love to see that. We'll see what happens, of course. I think he could be a very early day 2 pick, potentially. Now, getting to our next guy, we're going to be getting into one of the more freaky athletes of this class, someone we talked about during our fans video towards the end that I was a fan of very early in the college football season, but there's just things I heard about him that have me very concerned. And that's Chop Robinson. Now, talking about some of the good things, right? He's a very young football player. He's 21 years old. He's coming in at 6'3", which is not great, right? But okay. 254 pounds. Now, what's really weird about these numbers, and why I almost feel like they botched the measurements, or I have to have miswritten something, which I don't think I miswrote anything, but it's possible here. He's got a 32.5-inch, not wingspan, but that's his arm length, right? It's below par. It's not where you want it to be. But his wingspan was 76 inches. I don't know how that works. Like, just because I don't think you can be that narrow of a person compared to others as a football player. Like, because, okay, I'll give you an example. Our next guy, I won't name the name of this person, right? But they're exactly 2 inches longer as far as their arm length. So you got 2 arms, it's 4 inches, right? The difference between their wingspan is a whopping 8 inches. So there's another 4 inches in his like torso, is what I don't understand about Chop Robinson. I don't know if he just happens to be way more narrow than what we think, or he didn't stretch out his arms all the way, or what happened. But Chop Robinson ended up coming in with a really bad wingspan that, based off how bad it is, it might just not be as bad as it looks and could have been a bad measurement, which can happen. You know, I mean, for example, we had an offensive tackle that had 8.5-inch hands. He might not actually have that small of hands. It might have just been a bad measurement. But, you know, we'll see at the end of the day, of course. But Chop Robinson, a little bit of concern there, but where I really like him is that 40-yard dash. I mean, it's among the best in what we had. I think, in fact, it turns out second. Because I know we got another player we're going to talk about who was not supposed to be him in these measurements and in speed, but ended up doing it at the end of the day. He has a really good 10-yard split. Like, when we talk about Chop Robinson and what he brings to the field, getting into the film, Chop Robinson is as explosive of a player as you're going to get at the edge position. He's a very good athlete. He's got incredible burst. He plays with a high motor. He's always moving towards the ball. Always finding his way into the play the best he can, whether or not he gets there. He utilizes his speed to uproot defenders. He can force pressure doing that, so speed to power conversion is pretty good. He sets the edge well in the run game. He does have some upside in that regard. And with that speed, like we talked about with speed to power, that kind of turns into having a pretty good bull rush. So I like those things. He's got a ton of bend. Like, you're talking about what you want out of a speed rusher. Chop Robinson has almost everything you're ever going to ask for. The problem to me is, of course, the arm length. You know, what are you going to do with your pass rush arsenal? Those are the main questions. Talking about detriments here, he's on the ground far too often for me. He's a very raw prospect. He was someone who was supposed to break out this last year in college football. He was looked at early on before the season as potentially the edge one of this class. I mean, I remember hearing that. At the end of the day, that's just not where he was. It's not where his production was. His production was very limited. And the worst part of that, and this is the really concerning thing to me, that took him from a late first round guy to now he's like early to middle second, is that every bit of his production, you can go look at who he was playing, it was coming against bad offensive tackles. It was coming against players who, like, you look at their PFF grading, 60 is average, right? That's the middle, that's the benchmark, right? So the players he was going up against, they were scoring like 50s and 40s for their pass protection. So they're not great football players that he was getting production against. So that's concerning. Of course, you're always going to have opportunities every year where you play some bad tackles. But I just don't like that the production wasn't coming against other players than that. Now, of course, arm length is a concern. He's not going to meet the threshold I think Trent Baalke has for him, and that wingspan is kind of scary. And you just got to hope that something went wrong in the measurement. And then a lot of the time, it feels like he gets really close, but he's just not finishing the play. Now, if you want, you can try to spin that into a positive. Because you look at Josh Allen in 2022. A lot of plays where he's getting pressures. He's among the best in the league at getting pressure, but the sacks weren't there. He got 7 sacks that season. You come to this year, he's doing the same thing, but he's getting home. Now he's got 17.5. Now, of course, he just became a better player this last year. He improved his game. He's done that every year. I would argue, at least, better than when he got injured. But I don't know. I think with Josh Allen, it's sort of that same argument where maybe Chop Robinson, if he stayed in college every year, which he's not, of course, maybe he gets home more times next year. These numbers look better. He has some production against better tackles. Maybe it's a fluke. maybe these things aren't as much of a concern. But there are major flaws I see that lead to Chop Robinson being a very high bust potential player in these rankings. So I have a second round grade on him. I think it's an incredibly risky first round investment. I wouldn't even consider it if I was one of the teams that's picking 30, 31, 32, anywhere around there. It's not on my radar for a pick at that point. I think you want to get him maybe in the middle of the second round if you want decent value, and then hope that maybe some of those measurements are off, that you can develop him, be able to do that sort of stuff to get value out of him as a player. Now, getting to our next guy, you got one I'm a big fan of, Darius Robinson out of Mizzou. This dude, his build is just absolutely nuts. I was looking at how this compares to Trayvon Walker, for example, and a lot of these numbers, like, we're getting pretty close on them. Especially when we talk about wingspan, he's close. But he comes in at 6'5". He is an older player. He's going to turn 24 during the football season. He's 285 pounds, though. That's a big football player. He comes in with huge hands, over 10.5 inches, really long arms at 34.5 inches, wingspan's over 7 foot. Now, you see he's in red, of course, for 40-yard dash and 10-yard split. Now, that's the fun part of the conversation here, because it doesn't mean he's the slowest player in the world. Darius Robinson's carrying way more weight than these guys we're talking about. Like, for example, Chop Robinson, who ran literally nearly half a second faster, is carrying 30 less pounds. And he's, of course, among the most athletic in this class. Darius Robinson, why I have him as a DL on my position for the breakdown there, is because last year, in 2023, he did play around the edge more. But in 2022, he was playing inside. Both years, he's graded out really well as a player. He's dropped a little bit of size to play outside. And now you kind of got to ask yourself, like, what is he? Do you want him to be the guy who plays all around the formation? Do you want to be the interior guy who kicks out to the edge? You just got to answer that question for yourself. But I think whichever he does, this guy has sky-high potential at the next level and could be one of the special football players to come out of this class. That's why he's got a first-round grade for me. That's why he's 27th overall in my rankings. Phenomenal size in every metric. Ridiculous wingspan. He is a very fast player on the field for what he can offer. Now, like I said, he can play anywhere on the defensive line. He's played inside for a whole year. He's played outside for a whole year. So it's your choice what you want to do. I think the best thing for him, probably throw on 5 or 10 pounds. You play inside and outside. Or you could stay at 285. I mean, that could work too. But I think you want him to be a versatile player that you're running stunts on. You're trying to get creative with him. Because you put him in those situations, there's going to be some mismatches that he knows how to take advantage of. Now, as far as other positives with his profile, say he's fast off the snap. He's the first player going on defense most of these plays. He has a pass rush arsenal as well. And I think his best move that I saw was his arm over. I think he does a great job with that. Breaks free a lot of the time doing it. But of course, for concerns, he's an older prospect. Flexibility does leave something to be desired because he's 285 pounds. If you didn't know how that works, that's how it works, right? He isn't always a big impact player, but at the same time, like when you're playing inside, that's pretty rare for you to be at that level. There's not a lot of players who play inside that you're talking about him every single play, unless you're playing a team that only runs the ball. Then maybe that's the case. And then I think his pursuit speed, well, it's good, not really great, but overall, like, things to like about him. And where he really became a first-round prospect for me and probably every scout at the end of the day was watching him at the Senior Bowl. It didn't matter who he was playing. It didn't matter where he was lined up. He was winning basically every rep he went up against someone. He was easily one of the best players on the field. And you talk about some of these other guys who were there. You had Leatu Latu, who we'll talk about later. You had other positions, of course. You had Quinyon Mitchell. You had some good wide receivers out there. Like, there were plenty of prospects that are going day one, early day two out the Senior Bowl. You even throw out Fuanga, for example. And Robinson was one of the best players, and he was the guy who was getting talked about maybe the most out there. So things to just love about him. I think he's going to be a very good pro. I think he's going to be a freak athlete who is able to take advantage of that in a lot of different ways with a creative defensive line coach. So I'm really excited for what he's going to be at the next level. We'll have to see where he goes. I think if I had to guess right now, it's probably going to be Detroit at 29. I could also see Kansas City taking a shot at him. I think that would be a really fun pairing, but probably not to our advantage. Now, getting into the big three. I can't put Darius Robinson in the big three just because he's more of an all-around guy than an edge defender or an edge rusher, but he is a very good player. I want to make that clear. Laiatu Latu is the bottom guy of my big three. Now, we got a couple older players we're going to talk about here. Latu has turned 23 already. He's going to turn 24 towards the end of the NFL season. He has pretty good size. When you look at things, the wingspan's not great, but generally good. Comes in at 6'5", 259, 6.5-inch hands. His arm length is under par, but generally these things are fine. And he is a little bit faster than what most edge defenders are. Now, of course, keep in mind, Darius Robinson does kind of change the range here because how that's color-coded, bright green's going to be your fastest guy, and dark red's going to be your slowest guy. So Darius Robinson does a lot of work because, well, he's a lot heavier running than a lot of these guys. But Laiatu Latu, overall, like, physical stuff's all right. Where he wins and where you could have him as your edge one if you want, and people won't be that upset with you, is that pass rush arsenal he has. If I'm to give you, before I go into details, we'll go ahead and pull up the film here. If I could give you a player comparison for him, or like who do I think he would compare to in the pros with maybe a few changes, I think for one, you can say Jalen Phillips with more production. And the reason why I throw out Phillips is because of the injuries. Came from the same school as well, I believe, in UCLA, and ended up being really good pros. Just very good players at the next level. I think they even had similar builds, but obviously, like Jalen Phillips, just had a season-ending injury. So that's a little scary, right? But Latu, I mean, we've talked about this before. I'll just say it again. At one point, he was told he needed to medically retire. He has not had those injury issues since. Maybe it was a bad evaluation. But that is a scary thing to deal with, and why he's not first overall on my rankings, because we don't get access to that information. I don't know if it's bullcrap or not. So I cannot give a perfect evaluation on him like basically everyone else who's a scout, because I just don't know what the truth is. But if I'm to give another comparison in the pros for him, it feels like Aiden Hutchinson in the way he plays. Like, well, the weight's kind of there. He's a taller guy. Laiatu Latu, I don't see the strength as much in his game. Like, I don't think he's going to be a great run defender. But as a pass rusher, if he's not going against behemoths that can get their hands on him, he's going to throw everything he has at them. He's relentless. He has an arsenal of moves. He has a pass rush plan, and he's going to be a super productive pro. I believe all those things about Latu. It's very similar to what Aiden Hutchinson does. And you get the plays, too, where they just get overpowered and it looks stupid. I mean, there's points on film where that happens to Aiden Hutchinson. It'd be a lie if I didn't say that. So, Latu, those would be my two comparisons. But getting into my actual notes. He's got a generally large frame. I think he moves pretty quick for his size. He lives in the backfield, gets consistent pressure. I feel like he can move linemen easily when he's throwing everything at them because they just have a hard time properly engaging them. If he's winning with his hands, they can't get their hands on him. They can't use that power advantage that they have, and that's what he does so well. I think as well, Well, I said he's probably not a high-profile run defender. I do think he sets the edge well. So he's okay. Like, it's not going to be something that he's going to suck at, but I just don't think it's going to be a huge positive. Now, concerns, tackling has been an issue throughout his career. He needs to improve there. And adding more strength would do a lot for that. I think his bend is relatively average. And he did, just talking about strength again, while he was at the Senior Bowl, those issues were very clear. Like, there were plays where he went up against, like, Fuanga, and if he didn't get around the edge, like, he's dead. He's just dead. Like, he's not able to go up against those players that well. So, you've almost got to accept with him that I liked how this was said. I think it was off, I hope I get the actual channel right. I think it was Bootleg Football that was saying this. And if I'm wrong, please forgive me. They're basically saying that with Latu, like, you're going to get a lot of production out of him when you look at what he does in a season. But when you're looking at per game, you're going to have some games where you're like, well, damn, this guy just had 3 sacks, completely dominated this guy. Like, if he was keeping this up all year, he's the best pass rusher in the league. And that's going to be when he goes up against guys who are probably smaller, who don't have that strength advantage. You're also going to have the games where he just goes up against really good offensive tackles that can really combat anything you're throwing at him and need those all-around complete prospects to beat them. You're going to have those games where he's going to get maybe 1 pressure the whole time. I think it's going to be a very mixed career for Latu. It's just going to be like a roller coaster, but at the end of the day, he had enough highs over the season. I mean, half the season probably, maybe even more with how bad tackle play usually is in the NFL, where he's productive. And you're looking at a guy who probably has 13 sacks at the end of the year, and you're saying, well, yeah, maybe it was a non-factor for 6 games this year, but that's okay. Like, I got 13 sacks out of him. We'll be fine. So that's kind of the concern. But ultimately, like, if it wasn't for injury concerns, he might be number 1 on this list. I don't know if he'd make it that far, but he'd probably be up a spot realistically, or just at least the same overall grade, because he does come in at an A. Well, my final 2 guys, so you know they're going to be at this point, both come in at an A+. My second overall guy, and it really is just your choice here. I think they're just very similar as far as how good they overall are as prospects, but very different players and what they can throw at you. Jared Verse is my number 2 guy. He's 23 years old, halfway to 24. That is a big difference in this, because he's a player who's had a lot more experience. He's going to be more ready for the NFL, but obviously you kind of know what he is at this point. And what he is really damn good. That's the good news. He's 6'4", 254 pounds. He's got relatively big hands, nearly 10 inches. Good overall arm length. Wingspan's okay. What was impressive about Verse and why he went back up my list was watching his flexibility and how fast he was at the combine. This is a power rusher who has some speed elements. That's what's nice about Jared Verse. He ran a sub 4.6, came in at 4.58, hit a 1.6 second 10-yard split, and a really high RAS score, as he should have. It is a very good combination of speed and power in this class that he offers, and that's really where he stands out and probably takes the cake among all these prospects. Of course, I threw out Chris Braswell as well earlier in the video, but I think Jared Verse just does it all better. He has that great combination. He's constantly demanding double teams that have to limit his effectiveness. You think about what this would mean for a team that already has 2 serviceable or very good pass rushers anywhere in between there. All of a sudden, you have an incredible pass rush room. So it could be a phenomenal addition, say, for Jacksonville, where you may think, oh, they don't need that. They've got Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker. Well, you got to rotate guys, and now you got 3 guys who are just going to dominate at the next level. So really like that with Jared Verse. You could see how much teams have to game plan for him. He's a high motor player as well. He puts in constant effort every single play. He does well with leverage. He can uproot linemen. He can put them off balance. And I think he's a good run defender as well. This is a complete player and someone that if you're wanting to not go take a risk, he's an easy pick. A very easy pick for you. And I wouldn't be shocked if you went at 8 to the Atlanta Falcons. Now, of course, we'll have to see how things play out. I think if one of the receivers makes it to 8, there's obviously going to be some teams calling, and they're going to get a good offer for one of those teams to move up and take, Neighbors or Odunze. We'll see what happens, of course. The final thing with Verse, and this is what stood out immediately when you watch interviews, when you watch how he conducts himself, this is a pro's pro. Like, you look up in the dictionary what a professional does, how they conduct themselves. Jared Verse is the cover. That's what he does. Like, he conducts himself well. You're not going to worry about off the field stuff. He is going to be a leader on a football team. He will do that very, very quickly. I see him as a future captain in the NFL. Just phenomenal when you're talking about that aspect. As professional as it gets. Now, some concerns. Sometimes, like, when I'm watching film on him, it takes a little bit for him to get warmed up. He does have some boom or bust production this year as a pass rusher, kind of like we were talking about with Latu's projection to the NFL, but not really something he's constantly had. So maybe it's just happens to be the case this year. The bend, well, I said that he was more flexible than you expected. Of course, it's not great. It's just kind of average at that point, which is a good combination with the power profile he has. So a lot of the time, like when he's going to beat blockers, it's usually with his pass rush moves, and he has them. That's the good thing, right? Like, there's not a fatal flaw with Jared Verse when I'm looking through my notes on him. His burst can be kind of inconsistent. Some plays he's slow off the line, but once he's off the line, like I said, he plays with high motor. And since he went back for another year, which people were very confused why he did that in 2023 when the draft was coming around, he's going to be an older player now. He's going to turn 24 towards the middle of this football season. So he will be an older guy, but there's positives with that too, because he comes in with tons of experience. I think he's going to be an immediate impact player at the next level. I love what he's going to do for an NFL team. If you just need a power rusher, if you just want one, like, Jared Verse is your guy. And the great news is that there's a chance he falls pretty far in this class through the first round to where it's feasible for any team that wants him to go get him, as long as you got first round pick, of course. Looking at you, Carolina, Houston, and Cleveland. So, final guy here. You know who's first, of course, now. He was on the thumbnail. We haven't talked about him yet. It's Dallas Turner. Dallas Turner, the young prospect. You look at the top 4 here, he is literally over 2 years younger than every single one of them. Now, the immediate concern that I have when I look at Dallas Turner, which is fixed by the other measurements, is his height. He's not 6'3". He's closer to 6'2.5". That's not ideal. But at the same time, go look at all these air numbers. Look how good they are compared to these air prospects. He's got solid weight. I think he could put on a little more, of course, but big hands, great arm length, and a really good wingspan. We're coming in, I think, like an inch and a half short of where Darius Robinson is. And you look at the 40-yard dash, 10-yard split, RAS score, he's the fastest in the class at the 40-yard and the 10-yard split. Great stuff from him there. It's almost like when we talk about offensive linemen, and you might see a guy, it's like, he's 6'4" and he's playing tackle, but then he's got these 35-inch 35-inch arms, not 35-inch hands. It makes up for it, right? Because you get the leverage advantage because you're going to have your hands generally lower because you're shorter, but you've got the size with your hands and your arm length to be able to win. And so Turner has that combination, which is really nice. And so I think it makes up for his height. This is the reason why he is a very highly rated prospect for me. And right now, I believe he's the first of the non-blue chip prospects for me in this entire class. He's coming in at 9th overall. This is a very damn good player. When we went into 2023, what we were wanting to see from Dallas Turner was for him to be able to play with a bit more strength. This is clearly the area that he was lacking. Well, he came into 2023, and I think he silenced some of those issues. Now, is he the strongest player? No, of course not. But he has everything else, and his strength is functional. He is a fantastic speed rusher with great overall length, aside from the height, which he makes up for in everything else. He has great speed, incredible pursuit. He plays with violence. Something you love to see. He has good hand usage. He's playing with leverage. He has a wide variety of pass rush moves heading into the NFL. Throughout his career, he's been an ascending player. And so I just love what he can be at the next level and what he already is. That speed to power conversion as well. Like, the flashes that he shows on the field are second to none. And we get to concerns. I've got one thing written. He needs to add more strength to be a complete edge defender. I still think he does. I think it's gotten much better. That's the only thing. I could see him at the end of his first year turning into one of these guys you're looking at that second season saying he's going to be a 10-sack guy. Like, he's going to be a very good pro. And, well, Jacksonville, looking at all these prospects, is, of course, thinking, well, we got our 2 starters. I've said before, and I'll say it again and again and again, you can use a rotation. You need that on the interior. You need that on the outside. You need that on the defensive line. Dallas Turner can offer that. All these players can offer that at the end of the day. But you can take a player of this caliber and take them in the first round and be happy with that pick. You can, of course, complain and say, oh, I wish we got a receiver. I wish a guy of the same caliber was available. Of course you can do that, right? But you want to take the best player available, and there is a role for these players to have in Jacksonville if they pick him. So, like Dallas Turner, he's going to get on the field still. There's going to be things he's going to be able to do. I don't think he's going to be a liability right off the bat. He's going to be with a fantastic defensive coordinator if he comes here. He's going to have great players to work with. You're fine looking at this position at the end of the day with how much I think you need depth. So we've got some really exciting players all over, but my top one is going to be Dallas Turner. So that's what I've got for you guys for all the positional rankings this year. We, of course, didn't go over some, those being quarterback, running back. You could talk about safeties, linebackers. I'm not going to talk about kickers or punters ever. Sorry. I might do that during a mock draft. That's probably about it. But these are all positions I felt like made sense because they're places that we could go. We're not going to look closely into quarterbacks and running backs. We got our guys. Running back, we just invested another early pick in. It's no reason for it to really be the forefront of what we're talking about. Linebackers set for God knows how long. I mean, I might be dead by the time we need another linebacker. And then you look at safety, and you've got Antonio Johnson on a rookie deal. He's going to start there. He deserves to start there. And Andre Sisco should be an extension candidate. And quite frankly, I think he should get one before the year. So, talking about draft prospects, I think we hit on every one of them. That's going to be a priority for Jacksonville. And I'm really excited, looking forward to this class. I think it's going to be one of the best ones we scouted in quite a while. And so I just can't wait to see who we get. But with that all said, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to get to recording some other videos for you guys. You'll get them very soon. Plan to talk about, in the next one I'll put out, I might try to put it out today too, so you guys get 2 of them. We're going to talk about Malik Neighbors. There's hype around him being potentially the top player for Jacksonville at the wide receiver position in this class. I don't know where he is with Marvin Harrison Jr., but of the attainable players, he's the top. That's what we're hearing. And there's some buzz about Trevor Lawrence getting his extension before the 2024 NFL Draft. So I'm going to give my thoughts on that. I'm going to have a video out. I'm going to record it right after, get this uploading. Hopefully both of them come out today for you guys. Then we're going to get into some of our last videos. So with that all said, I am going to wrap this up. I'm not going to talk about that forever. I'm going to go ahead and start recording them. So thank you for joining me. I appreciate you guys being on this channel. All the support means the world to me. love doing this for you all. It is a blast. It's great to have people listen to the things you say. That's one of the nice things when you do YouTube is that people are there to watch you. So I enjoy it. I love talking to you guys. Please comment away. Let me know what you think. Love to hear it. But that's all I've got. Enjoy your weekend. And finally, go Jags.